The World Economic Forum, Stellenbosch University new social covenant event made possible by Barclays Africa.
Well, let me share with you some of the observations I made in the sort of closed session, because I don't mind being on the record. Covenants work because you have different views participating in the establishment. And one of the problems about this discussion is that it's all too agreeable and nice. The process of covenants is always a very messy process. It's untidy, there are different voices, but you need to be clear about where you must take things. Now, starting with the premise that the world is a bad place, or in a bad place, that trust is broken, that there's great inequality is correct. But part of knowing that is also being informed about how we got to be here. If you don't understand that, then you risk repeating the same mistakes. And if you want to build trust, then it's very important that those issues be on the table as well, because you can't gloss over them.
When you say it's important that we understand how we got here, do you mean we've got to go to the root cause of the problem?
Yeah, I think that the problem has very distinct root causes. In fact, there's a kind of argument that says by the end of the Second World War, the previous history had been wiped out, new institutions were started, there were new opportunities, and then there was some phasing out of colonial relations and so on, and the world was in a much better place. But by the mid-80s, things started to unhinge very badly, because it was a different ideology taking root. And now you've had this multiplied over and over again, and leadership is in very short supply, and leadership is expected to deliver anything within a fixed time period, whether this be elected public leaders who are required to deliver by the time of the next election, or this be corporate leaders who are frequently required to deliver by the next quarter, because that's what analysts want. But we're talking of a problem that is deep.
Are we in crisis from a leadership perspective?
I think that we're in a crisis from a leadership perspective, but there's too little support, so it's easier to cop out. It's easier not to engage with the really difficult issues. And the really difficult issues are there in the intent of this covenant, which includes the fact that too many people are excluded from the mainstream at the moment. And the exclusion includes a sense of and reality of deep inequality in income distribution.
Can I throw in a stat there?
In opportunities.
Can I throw in a stat there? Because I think we've got to talk about this wealth gap, the income inequality, and hopefully I'm correct on this, but the richest 400 people in the US, their total wealth is the same as 155 million people, the poorest people in the US. So their combined wealth match one another. Now, doesn't that just put the size of the problem on the table? And how are we going to start to reverse that?
Yeah, I think that the point, and not many people have actually read Thomas Piketty through, but he makes a very strong point about the fact that you're not going to resolve it by taking X amount of the wealth of those wealthiest people and then just giving it to poorer people. We need to invest differently in public services and recreate opportunities. Now, it takes a little bit longer, but I think it's going to be a more durable change. And that's a big issue the world over. I see it in South Africa, I see it on the African continent, that there's resistance to the equalization of public services. If anything, public services for poor people ought to be better and stronger than those that more affluent people have access to.
How do we buy ourselves the time? You say the process is going to take longer. Isn't there, this is a ticking time bomb, isn't it?
You know, part of the discussion here is a tribute to somebody who should have been with us today, the late rector of University of Stellenbosch, Professor Russell Botman. And Russell was very strong on the idea of, and he quoted often from Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of Hope. And the Pedagogy of Hope is quite a simple premise. It says that you've got to show that tomorrow is better than today because today is demonstrably better than yesterday. And so if more people feel that they are being considered and that their lives are being included and that their lives will improve, then I think you have created that basis. But it won't work unless there's trust. And part of creating trust is actually creating that all-in sense that what exists at the moment is actually wrong and unfair and the system is broken.
I like to source tangible examples, and I'm going to use PPC and Ketso Gordhan as a tangible example of someone who has really put his money where his mouth is, and he's closed that wage gap within PPC from 120 to 1 to 40 to 1 by adjusting his top executives' pay and his lower workers or employees in terms of their pay levels and pulling those up slightly.
It's a worthy attempt. It's symbolic more than substantive. By Ketso's estimates, that'll produce R1 billion a year if it's done repeatedly. One thing that we must ensure is that the R1 billion is well spent. But R1 billion a year is about 1/3 of 1% of the size of our state budget. Now, there's very little merit in doing that if we as South Africans sit back and allow for the kinds of wastage we see of public resources. It's not one or the other. It's not about doing stuff to make us feel good as individuals and allowing for bad things to happen all around us. It's ensuring that we use the fruits of our democracy to raise the living standards of people in a demonstrable way. And yes, along the route, I think that if we use the Ketso Gordhan example as a kind of benchmark, it's a good inspiration for other people.
Have you got better solutions as a starting
No, I
point?
don't have a better solution. I do think that in the way in which we crafted the National Development Plan, the working mechanism for this must firstly be active citizenry. And active citizenry, I think, would be expressed in the desire to have better outcomes in terms of what happens to public services. I think that's a very important starting point. I think we as the Planning Commission understood very clearly that sometimes that's going to be an untidy expression. It's not always going to be people sitting in neat rows raising procedural points in meetings. Sometimes it's a very loud voice. But active citizenry, I think, is a very important part of democracy. That's one part of it. The second part of it is, and it must assist and facilitate that active leadership, but it's also a consequence of it, and that is leadership in society. Leadership is not about one person. It's not about the executive of the ANC. It's not about the cabinet. It's about far more than that, and we need more people involved who see themselves as leaders, and that's quite important within this. And what you're saying to me about the example of a Ketso Gordhan is the example of leadership. A third part of it is effective government. We'll know when it's there, just as we know when it's not there.
What is going to happen to the National Development Plan now?
Look, I can't rule this thing from the grave. Cyril Ramaphosa, as Deputy President and formerly Deputy Chair of the Planning Commission, is the Chair of the Planning Commission now. And we must encourage the continuing work, not just in private, because I do know that the Planning Commission is meeting periodically. It has to be seen to be focusing on implementation. And the combination now of the Secretariat of the Planning Commission with the Ministry of Monitoring and Evaluation is fundamentally important as well, because you can set where you want to get to and be held publicly accountable for performance against that.
Do you believe that we are going to see execution when it comes to the NDP?
You know, it's not about belief. It's about ensuring that we can raise the commitment levels. Some of these things actually take time because they're behavioral. And let me cite the example of education, where about 14 months ago there was the launch of the Education Collaboration Partnership Trust, which is jointly chaired by Angie Motsecha as Minister of Basic Education and Sizwe Nqasana as representing a voice from the private sector. And there's been, as far as I can see, a lot of work done in some of the more difficult education districts where problems appeared intractable. Part of what you need to change is not big curriculum. It can be facilitated by the issues people frequently talk about. Are we getting books in? Are we getting infrastructure improved upon? But the big challenge in education is whether you can change a number of relationships. Can you change the relationship of the teacher with the learners? And it requires of teachers to know their subject and be able to facilitate this. It is a moving target because many students have better access to information technology, and that's important. That's one relationship. The second is, can you change the relationship of the school principal to the teachers? Can the principal oversee what happens? And the third is, can you change the relationship between that principal and the community